On today's episode, we're going to talk about world building and how living in Germany has made my worlds that much richer. Hello hier Lieblings, I'm Mari, a science fiction and fantasy author who's been living in southern Germany since 2014. So today we're going to talk about world building, and this episode is actually going to be the first in a series that I have planned, where I would like to actually, I'm going to of course list the world building basics, but then I would like to do a field trip and actually go to different cool, awesome places in Germany, and there are a lot of them, where I will actually apply these world building basics and show you these cities and show you these sites. So it's kind of like looking at Germany through a writer's lens. But before we get started, please hit the subscribe button and ring the bell if you haven't already. Here on Adventures of Lamari, I talk about writing, living abroad, and everything in between. For those of you who are fans of George R.R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire, or its also equally popular HBO television version of Game of Thrones, Martin talked about how he got his main inspiration for the plot from The War of the Roses. And I mean, there's so much to history that you can take from to, for plot devices and whatnot, and for inspiration. And for me, I use Germany. Actually, by the way, I highly recommend this book. This is not like a paid sponsorship or anything. This was a book I found in the Frankfurt airport when I was heading to Spain for baptism. And it is so good. It is so good. It's very, the shortest history of Germany. There is so much history to cover. But it really, it's just so good. And considering that it had, a really good review from Philip Pullman, who's one of my all-time favorite writers, I just had to buy it. So I highly recommend it. I highly recommend this. Even, I don't really read nonfiction books, ever. And I'm still I love this book. So anyway, that's my little weird Werbung, but not really Werbung. But anyway, I do highly recommend you get the book. Not just for world building, but just in general, because it is really cool. It's a really good way to give yourself an intro to German history. So I have divided my world building technique into 6 groups. Technically there are 5, depending on if you're going hardcore into fantasy or hardcore into science fiction. But if you're a genre bender like myself, I do both. I've used both magic and technology. So anyway, I have this little pretty thing over here that I have created, so you see what big topics we're going to talk about, and I will also go through the subtopics within them. So let's get started. So first we have geography, so that's kind of the basic stuff. So we have location. So of course you need to break down your world. You can start with a star cluster or a whole galaxy, then go down to star cluster, then go down to star system, then a specific planet, then continent, country, region, town, city, village, whatever. Next, you need bodies of water, especially when you're having to figure out where your cities are, especially your capital cities. Major cities usually are able to develop faster when they are closer to bodies of water. So whether it is a river or an ocean or a huge ass lake like Constance or Bodensee, these are things you do need to keep into account. Next, you have landscapes and climates, which are also, common sense. When you think about it, landscape, what does the land look like? Is it a desert? Is it rolling green hills? Is it a tundra? Is it an unforgivable icy landscape like Hoth in Star Wars? Who knows? There's something you do need to think about. And climate then is usually what helps create what that landscape is. So you do need, you can't be oh, it's a desert, but it snows. It doesn't, guys. I know this is common sense what I'm talking about, but you do need to keep that in mind. And in terms of climate, you do need to think about how long are your seasons, or if they have how long are their seasons. Germany, for example, has very mild seasons compared to Indiana, for example. In Indiana, our summers are hotter, our winters are colder. And in Germany, they're just milder in general. Or going back to the George R.R. Martin reference, in his world of Westeros, just Westeros and Essos, their summers last for hundreds of years, their winters last for 1,000, not 1,000 years, but you know what I mean? Their seasons don't last a typical 3 months like in our world or in our planet. It is very specific to that world, and it is often, referenced and causes for different events in their history, which I'll delve into later. Next, we're going to talk cultures. First, there's power. So like, what is the power structure? This place, you know, if you're going to concentrate on a city or a country, does, you know, where does it stand in essentially like this hierarchical food chain that you have in your world? Is it a, you know, a capital, or is it just simply a large city that has a huge population and therefore lots of political pull? That is something you do need to think about, or same with like planets and whatnot. This also kind of goes into government. What kind of government are we going to have? Is it going to be a monarchy? Is it going to be an oligarchy? Is it going to be a democracy? Or who knows? I mean, obviously there's a lot of choices you can have with governments, but you got to think about it. Next, you need religion. Are you going to go for, you know, one of the big major religions in our world? Or are you going to make up your own? Is it polytheistic? Is it monotheistic? You know, many gods versus one god? Who knows? You have to think about religion. Art and entertainment, of course, because that does feed into culture. How people express themselves can say a lot about a culture. Relations. So how does this specific place relate to other countries, cultures, planets, what have you? Are they pacifist? You know, it goes into like the kind of government. Are they pacifists? Are they warmongers? Whatever. Like, how are their relations to other countries? Who are their allies? Who are their enemies? You know, you have to keep those things in mind, because it does create conflict if you have, you know, like enemies between countries. And then of course you have architecture that kind of feeds into it with kind of art and entertainment. And as well, you know, with like the climate itself. Where I live, half-timbered houses with red clay roofs are very, very popular. Well, I say popular. Popular is not necessarily the right word. It's what you can find, you know, because the materials are readily available. So that is just what developed in this area of Germany. If you go up to northern Germany, their architecture is very different. And it's actually, and even their climate is slightly different, because, you know, all of those things affect each other, and therefore, you know, these areas and develop differently, even if it is within the same country. You know, you can't go monolithic with even just one country. Look at Germany with its like 250 different dialects. If you saw my video on dialects, you'll know what I'm talking about. Next, we have social classes. So of course you want to go into divisions. Is there a caste system? Is there a hierarchy? Do you have, you know, high class, low class, middle class? Or is it a utopia? Is everybody equal? Or communism? Whatever. You know, how are these social classes divided? Next, we have food and drink. Now, unfortunately, I feel like a lot of people maybe skip this sort of thing. They'll try to go for something basic, especially when writers are writing about a journey and their characters are traveling somewhere and they stop for the night and they make a stew. And that is actually one of my biggest pet peeves, because as somebody who knows how to make stew, that is just no. And let me explain. While on paper, stew seems like a practical choice because it is just like readily available ingredients. You throw it into a pot and boom, stew. Except stew takes hours to cook, usually like at low heat, to give it that, you know, wonderful, hearty, tender taste. And a lot of times your characters don't necessarily have the time to actually make stew. Now you can find stew in like an inn, because usually in an inn, that thing has been, you know, boiling all day. So it's more practical. But if you're traveling, I'll tell you, somebody who has gone on road trips and camping, you want stuff that's not going to go bad and that's easy to transport. So usually I've gone with like bread, cheese, dried meats, fruit, at least for the first few days, because obviously fruit can go bad very quickly. But even bread, you have to be careful because obviously that hardens rather quickly as well. But you know, you have to think about it. And so there's actually a great podcast from Writing Excuses. I'm going to put the link below to the specific podcast, which is called well, it has to do with food and eating your way to world building, and it is really awesome, like what they talk about. And also going back to the whole stew analogy, because a lot of people are like, oh well, because potatoes are totally a medieval, you know, totally readily available in medieval Europe. And actually, no, it's not. Potatoes came to Europe in the 1600s from Peru and South America when the Spanish brought that over. Same with corn. So what you would, you know, since especially in fantasy, when people are basing it off of medieval Europe, obviously potatoes is where that inspiration no longer equates, since, you know, potatoes weren't really readily available at that point in time. Next, we have professions. So your area, you know, what is it known for? Is it known for, you know, like, look, I'm going to keep using Song of Ice and Fire just because it's awesome. You know, you have the Reach, which is home of House Tyrell. They're known for their agriculture. Or Dorne is known for their wine. The North is known for protecting us from the wildlings, whatever. You know, like, each area has its specialty. Of course, you have all, you know, you have all kinds of professions, but a lot of times, you know, countries or certain regions are able to better develop, or their economy booms because of something specific. And last is appearance. Now, appearance is a little tricky, because we, you know, we want diverse books. Diverse books. Not everyone is white. Even in medieval Europe. I mean, yeah, they're still majority white, and I live in Germany, and it's still, compared to where I went to school, it's very white. It's still very white, but, you know, it is what it is. But, you know, you don't necessarily want all of your characters to look the same. And even in Germany, you know, people still don't look the same. There's still influences from Poland and from Czech Republic and from Turkey, especially with the Gastarbeiters from like the 60s and 70s. Then you have, you know, like from the Nordic region. My husband has a very Nordic first name. When I was in Sweden recently, I got a lot of laughs. Not like mean laughs or anything, you know, from my new Swedish friends, but they're just like, because my husband is tall, you know, darker hair than mine, and he's very German. He's very, very German. But when I showed, you know, my Swedish friends photos of my husband with his name, they're just like, yeah, no, I pictured like a tall blonde Swede with that name. And yeah, sorry if I'm not telling you what his name is. I usually try to keep anything husband related out of YouTube. But just trust me when I say that. He has a very Nordic name, but that comes from, that does influence Germany as well. And France. And Switzerland. And Luxembourg. You know, like everybody, you know, they're still, it's not, yeah, okay, predominantly white, but still even within white people, there's still diversity. You cannot have everybody have dark hair and dark eyes, or blonde hair and blue eyes. That's just not realistic. So when it comes to appearances, usually you want to try to keep it varied, but you can, at least I guess with skin tone, depending on the region and, you know, the history, there are things you do have to take into account, but it is something to keep in mind. How are your people in this area supposed to look? And that's usually when I'm looking at fantasy. Now with science fiction, you know, it goes a little differently, because ideally, a lot of people write, you know, far in the distant future where, you know, humans have left Earth. So it's not like just Americans left Earth or just Germans left Earth. It's usually like everybody from all over the world left Earth. And so you do have like a conglomeration of different, you know, cultures and religions and what have you, and that does need to be reflected in your world. Or, you know, that's for sci-fi that are like more human specific. But if you're going for like, you know, Star Trek or Star Wars, where you have also aliens as well, you know, you could really get creative with that in terms of diversity. A couple really good examples of world building at that. There is the Behind the Throne series by K.B. Wagers or Wagers, or I can't speak English anymore, but her world is Indian inspired, which is really different and really cool. I highly recommend it. And it's fully a matriarchy society where women are the ones in control, and it is kind of like a, you know, a flip on gender equality. It is a really fascinating space opera. Highly recommend it. And another one is by Becky Chambers, A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, where not only are we introduced to different aliens, but also aliens of different sexualities, which is also something, you know, granted it has nothing to do with appearance, but it does have to do with, I guess, culture and, you know, how do people perceive sexuality in your, well, whether in your medieval fantasy or in your sci-fi technologically advanced world, or you have a sci-fi with fantasy like I do. Just FYI. Next, we have history. Now, the thing about history, before I go like too much into it, that's something you do. This is where a lot of authors or writers kind of fall into a rabbit hole, because once you start, you know, get started, you're like, oh, you have all these like ideas of like this big epic history, and that's great. That's total. I mean, I don't want to say you don't do it. Do it. If it brings you joy, do it. Totally do it. But remember that you're only going to use like a very little bit, just a little bit when you're writing. Because unless it actually impacts the plot directly, it's an info dump and we don't need that. So be careful. Have all that history and you can, you know, have it in like your series Bible or whatever. You know, use it. But keep in mind that you're not going to be able to use everything. You know, the whole picture of the iceberg, and you see like the very, you know, the small tip of it, and then the bottom, you know, beneath it is like this huge epicness. That is writing history in your world. There is so much to it, but only a very tiny percent of it is actually seen by your readers. So in terms of history that does directly impact the plot, I like to think of two subjects of history to keep in mind, and that is traumatic events and power shifts, because those usually are where there are big conflicts that can either directly impact the plot, or it's just, you know, part of your whole world building, and that, you know, maybe even down the line affects your plot. But those are the ones that usually are the ones that you can talk about in your books, because they all have to do with conflict, and yay, we love conflict when we're writing, woohoo! Next we have magic. Magic is either, you know, there's a soft magic system or a hard magic system, and that would have to be a whole other video. But I definitely do plan on doing it, but that's something you do need to keep in mind. What kind of magic are you going to have? Are you going to have one with hard set rules, thus being a hard magic system, or are you just going to be like, conveniently, here's, you know, like, well, a really great example of soft magic system is in Lord of the Rings, because Gandalf has magic. We don't really know what he can do. A lot of times he's able to do what needs to be done conveniently. He's very powerful, but we don't know the rules. We don't know the behind the scenes with those magic systems, as opposed to, say, Tamara Pierce in her Tortall series with the gift or with wild magic. Like, especially with wild magic, a big chunk of the first book is just learning the rules of the magic system, because it's a completely new magic system in this world. And it's cool. It's really fun, but that's something you have to, you know, you have to take into consideration. And lastly, we have technology. Again, so magic if you want to go for medieval fantasy, technology if you want to go into science fiction. What kind of technology are we going to have? Is it going to be all new and shiny? Is it going to be, you know, crap? Like old, you know, the original Star Wars, where it's all like really beaten to hell, or with Firefly, for example, where everything's just like literally spare parts thrown together. And so we have like, and with science fiction, you have actually like hard science fiction, which is really like diving into the science and the technology and all like the rickety-rackety of it. Or you have a soft science fiction or a space opera, which is, it's set in the future. Yeah, there's technology, but we're not really going to focus on that because we want to focus on the people. But those are things you do need to take into consideration. And whew, that is a long ass list, and me talking at you, you know, is all great and all, but I am really excited about doing this little field trip bit. Let me know if you have some ideas of what you'd like to see. I already have a list. Don't worry, it's not like, you know, I haven't planned this series or anything, but let me know if there's a place in Germany, especially for non-Germans, that you would like to see. Because I know a lot of American writers especially don't actually get a chance to go to Europe. And I am in Europe, and I have so many cool places around me that I love to visit, and I would love to show you. So, like I said, and show it to you from a writer's perspective. So, I'm excited for this series. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and thank you for joining me. If you're new here, please consider subscribing and give this video a thumbs up. It lets me and YouTube know that you are totally interested in content like this and you want to see more. And if you have any other questions, comments, or anything else you would like to see on this channel outside of, you know, my writing bit or my expat bit, let me know in the comments below. The God Queen is available in both ebook and paperback. I have all the links for the book in the description below. And don't forget to connect with me on social media, whether it is through Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter. And that's it for today. Until next time, ade!